Welcome back to People You Want to Know podcast. I know I say I release an episode every Wednesday, but I'm realizing that I've been doing 2 episodes a week for quite a bit now because honestly, really cool opportunities have come up. Today's episode is another one of those opportunities. I had the privilege to interview Tamara Eidelman, a Russian historian, teacher, and YouTuber. Tamara has 1.6 million subscribers on YouTube, where she posts long-form videos breaking down the history of major events. She'll do everything from breaking down Stalin to talking about the mafia in New York City and The Godfather. I learned of Tamara when the war in Ukraine started in 2022. She has always been outspoken in her support of Ukraine, but in 2022, she and her family made the decision to leave Russia permanently, and she'll talk about that. Tamara has written many articles and books and done countless speaking engagements. Most recently, she has become known for her lectures that she hosts all over the world. Now, in April, she's going to be doing a tour with her lecture in North America, in Canada and the US. For my friends in New York, LA, Chicago, and other major cities, you can go see Tamara's lecture for yourself. I put all the details in the description. I do think this episode will resonate particularly with Russian-speaking people. We are all obviously very impacted by the war in Ukraine and what has happened. And talking to Tamara is a very validating experience because it's an opportunity to see a Russian person support Ukraine and have very articulate and sound talking points on some of the issues. Because most of my listenership is English speaking, we had this interview in English. However, throughout the episode, you will see me sprinkle in some Russian in there as well. Together, Tamara and I discuss her work and her iconic lecture that she's doing the tour with, her experience meeting various Russian and Ukrainian people after the war, her Jewish identity, and what she is hopeful for in light of all the darkness. It's a beautiful episode. It's not a light one, but definitely one worth listening to. Please enjoy. Hello, Tamara. Thank you so much for coming on People Jew Want to Know podcast.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, it's a real privilege to have you on. Let's get right to it. I'll ask you my first question. Tell us about yourself. What do you do and how did you get there?
It's an interesting question. For many years, I used to answer it in the only way that was clear to me. I always said, I'm a teacher. That is one of the most important things in my life. I used to teach in Moscow schools, high schools for 40 years. It's a lot of time. And then I started feeling, I still love teaching, but I started feeling that I would like to do something new. And my son and my daughter-in-law came to the idea that we could start a YouTube channel. That's what we did 4 years ago. And it completely changed our lives and my life for certain. And now I'm a retired teacher already, and I don't live in Moscow anymore, unfortunately, because of the war. I live in Portugal, and my main occupation now is making lectures for my YouTube channel. And I can tell you that I never thought that I would have 1,600,000 subscribers. That is something I still think it's not about myself, it's about somebody else. And so we started before COVID and before the war, this big war, let's say so, a big invasion. And we were developing the channel. It was fun, it was good. Eventually it became very complicated to do that and to teach at school, although I had a few classes, but still it was complicated. And I retired, and then we had COVID when everybody wanted to listen to something and to watch YouTube. And then, unfortunately, all these terrible events occurred, and my family, we all immediately left Russia because we are very much politically engaged. And we understood that there is no place for us in Russia anymore, unfortunately. And of course, no possibility to work and to talk freely. Well, it's a very tragic event for all of us, naturally. But at the same time, now I can record anything I want. I can say anything I want. I always get such a feedback from people who are happy to hear what I say, that it's a really very important thing for my life. So now I can't say anymore that I'm a teacher. I can say that I'm a YouTuber. I suppose I should call myself also. 5 years ago, it was impossible to imagine because people on YouTube are rock stars or those who show how they pack and unpack things or some other strange things. Now I am also here, but that's life and I like it.
Wow. And you're on tour now in North America. You're doing a tour, right? In the US and in Canada as well. What are you talking about on your tour? And what is your experience meeting Russian speaking people that live in America or North America?
Well, we are recording when I'm only starting my tour. Yes, but it will begin in the beginning of April. And I go with the lecture that I already made in many European countries. It is called Judgment of History. It's about different ways to judge historical events, to judge people. It's about guilt and responsibility. Because at the moment, the idea of historical guilt, of personal guilt and responsibility, a collective responsibility, it's something people keep discussing again and again and again. And I decided, first of all, to put it into historical perspective because I start with ancient times and then we go to 20th century and to situation of post-war Germany and how they dealt with their guilt after Second World War and Holocaust, and many, many other things. It's rather hard to describe all. But main idea is how people looked and still look at guilt and responsibility in different situations, in different cultures. And, I feel that people really need to talk about that. Because I suppose I gave this lecture about 30 times already in different places. And usually there are dozens and dozens of questions. Sometimes people keep asking questions for 2 hours after lecture. It became a very special experience because usually people don't ask many things about history, about historical problems. Also, we talk about different historical events, important historical events. Many people start confessing what they feel or start speaking about their own feeling of guilt, of responsibility. And I hear how sometimes they speak slowly and with difficulties finding words. And it's not because they don't know how to talk freely. It's because, it's kind of psychotherapy. They want to say something that is inside their soul. And it is really hard for me because my lecture lasts for 2.5 hours or 3 hours sometimes. And then we have all this communication with all these people. But it's incredibly important. And it gives me such feeling of sense that I am really grateful to all these people. Well, and I hope that I haven't yet given this lecture on American continent. And I'm a little bit worried because, maybe people feel different here and have their own problems and they will look at me as somebody who came from so far and doesn't understand them. I don't know. But at the same time, I got a lot of mails, a lot of messages from people, and both from Canada and from the USA, who write that they are waiting for me, that they will be happy to hear me. So I hope that everything will be okay for me and for my audience.
Is there anything someone has asked you at one of these lectures that you gave that, or maybe they shared that really stuck out with you that you will remember that you can share here?
There are many things. Well, I can tell you about 2 fantastic situations. One happened in Berlin when a young man, and in my lecture, I speak about a person who lives in Russia who managed to get information about his great-grandfather who was executed in Stalin times. He went to court. He sued FSB and he got permission to have these papers. And he published them. And he found names of people who executed his great-grandfather. in prison. And the young woman who lived in the same town, she read it and she understood that one of them was her grandfather. And then they had a very special, a very intense, emotionally intense communication. And she asked him for pardon or something like that. And as he wrote, they made an act of peace and mutual understanding. And so in Berlin, a young man came to microphone. I am from Ukraine. I am from Mariupol. At that moment, you can imagine what I felt. I was petrified. And he said, and I keep saying to other Ukrainians, that we do not have to look at all people in Russia as a whole. We have to judge every person after his or her deeds. And I would like to make such act of peace and understanding with you. And that was one of maybe the most important things in my life. And then we hugged and kissed. And the next day we started with my team saying, and where's the photo of this hug? But everybody was so amazed that nobody even made photo. The next year he came to my lecture again, and then we made photo. Now I know that his name is Dmitry. And that was something really very important. And another thing happened in Greece when a woman took a microphone and she said, I don't think I should ask this question, but I will do that. I will ask you. Okay. I left Russia 20 or more than 20 years ago. I never voted for this government. What can I do with my feeling of guilt that I feel every day? I said, I don't know. What can I tell you? That's my main idea, is that every person has to deal with his or her feelings, with his or her responsibility individually, decided by themselves what is your responsibility. You can't tell another person that, you are guilty, that's why you have to do this or that. Of course, if it's a criminal act, then of course. But if we talk about moral responsibility, everybody decides. That's for people to decide. So I couldn't help her. But I keep thinking about her, how strong this feeling must be, that she is really, as I understood, she's completely dissociated from Russian history, from Russian life. And still she feels it.
I think a lot of Russian people feel that way. With her situation, it's different because she hasn't lived there. She can't be responsible for the action of a country where she does not live, where she's no longer a citizen, which is tough. But many people who did live in Russia, they feel this guilt because they were like, we knew this was going to happen. We saw where we were heading, but we didn't think it would get this bad. And they have this guilt of, if only I left sooner, if only I spoke up earlier, if only I had an opinion, if only I saw this coming sooner. And that's where a lot of the guilt comes from, I think. I will also tell you, I recently watched 20 Days in Mariupol, the movie that came out, the best documentary at the Oscars. And I'm from Donetsk. I have processed the situation 8 years before everybody else, and so has my family, because we're from a city where this began, unfortunately, 8 years ago, and the people of Donetsk decided to go to Russia. And what happened in Donetsk is perhaps, other than Mariupol, some of the worst crimes and some of the worst things that we have seen come out of this war. Maybe as difficult as it to come to terms with, when everything started in Ukraine, maybe the first 6 months, it was very hard for me. But then I kind of came to terms with it perhaps quicker than others, because I already knew about this 8 years ago when it happened in my own city. But watching that documentary, I took a huge step back. It really, the emotions flooded, the trauma flooded, seeing the images, seeing the footage. And the hard part is they show you the good, the bad, and the ugly. They show you Ukrainian people who are so desperate that they're going to go and steal from every single store in their own city. They're going to go and break the windows and try to get whatever they can. The kids who are stealing PlayStations and Xboxes. So seeing also the dark side of humanity, like on my side, it's very hard to see. And that documentary, it made me take a huge step back in my processing of the situation. It reflooded everything for me.
I still can't collect enough strength to watch it. I know that I should do that, and I will. but still can't.
I do want to ask you, though, the elephant in the room question. Do you have an opinion on what's going to happen in Ukraine? Because for someone like me who saw what happened to Donetsk, I'm concerned that what Donetsk is today is just going to become the rest of Ukraine. Like that will be how this ends. They're slowly going to, push, and they're going to level Ukraine until it becomes like Donetsk, where there are no roads, no water, heat turns on and off. It's just not a great place to live. It's not safe.
Well, history is not about future. History is about past. So, of course, I can't make any predictions. And one thing that I know for sure, that history is unpredictable and anything can happen, anything bad, anything good. But what I can say from things that I know about other times, other cultures, that unfortunately every war destroys people's, not only kills people, it destroys people's minds, people's souls. And I remember last time I was in Ukraine, I was in Kiev in spring 2014. And I was amazed how the city was full of friendliness, of joy, how open all people were. And that was a real treat being there. And now, of course, everything changed. And not only because of bombings, but because of that too. But of course, every person who goes to war or who witnesses the war or lives in these times is already traumatized. This is a very big problem for Russia. And in a different way, I'm sure it will also be a problem for Ukraine. I hope with all my heart that Ukraine will win, that Ukraine will get all its parts back. But then the most important, maybe more important thing will begin, because they will have to heal these wounds made by war, made by Putin. And it is very hard. I understand how terribly hard it will be for Russia when thousands of people will come back from this war where they did terrible things, and some of them will understand what they had done and others not, and there will be families of those who were killed. It will be terrible. This psychological situation will last for decades, and it has to be dealt with by psychologists, by society, by schools. But it's clear that in Ukraine, also people will be hurt by war, by hatred. Some will feel themselves as victims. As far as I understand, that nationalist feelings are already getting stronger. And I really hope that Ukraine will be able to deal with that. Because if not, it will mean that Putin won, and I don't want that.
That's very interesting that you say that. And I think it's a fair point you make where you say, I teach history. I talk about history. I talk about the past, not the future. I do want to ask a challenging question. Maybe you don't have an answer for it, but are there any principles you see in history that we should follow? Any message that you want to share with young people as they go through their lives?
It's very difficult, because so many historians try to find laws in history. Oh, we all were taught Marxist laws, but there were many others also. It's very tempting because you see some things that look more or less the same, and here is the line, here is the tendency. Sometimes it's very interesting what historians write about that, but I think it's very hard to judge when you are inside. We are inside this system. We are inside this process. It's very difficult to assess it like that. To me, the most important thing is, maybe it's banal, but still, that in the darkest times, there are people who do not agree with darkness, who fight, who stand, maybe not fight, but stand against it, who preserve their souls, who preserve their belief in humankind. This is, to my mind, the most important thing in history. And we can find it in any century, in any country, everywhere.
You haven't watched the documentary, but there's a line in the 20 Days of Mariupol documentary that says when there's war, your personality, it's almost like amplified. The good becomes greater and the bad becomes worse. So good people step up, and people who had, mean or evil inclinations become worse during this time.
Yes,
which is what you're saying. And it's kind of ironic because if we think about Jewish people and Jewish culture, right, we've always had very clear principles and laws by which we feel we should abide generation from generation. Doesn't matter how time evolves, we have a strong anchor by which we live. So when you think about your upbringing and your heritage, how has your Jewish identity played into how you view the world or what your current state of feeling is?
Well, I can't say that I am a traditional Jewish person, but to my mind, my Jewish inheritance taught me, first of all, that collective guilt doesn't exist. That's what people in so many places try to put on the Jews, that you are responsible for yourself. And another thing is that, that is something that very often is said against Jewish people, that they are ironic, that they are critical, that they are, which means that they are rational. To my mind, I am a very emotional person, but to preserve your mind, your rationality in the worst situations, to me, it's part of my inheritance that comes to, I don't know, Heinrich Heine, let's say like that, and many, many others. Oh, Einstein.
And switching gears here a little bit, I wanted to ask you about your YouTube channel, because I'm sure you kind of see, who are the people that follow you, what people comment, the general sentiment around things. And I wanted to ask you, especially as it pertains to history, all things Ukraine and Russia, people have really strong opinions about what happened and what did not happen, and strongly held viewpoints. Do you see any such viewpoints in your audience?
Oh, yes, every moment, every time. And, sometimes I feel as if I just open my mouth and already somebody is offended. Well, because people have so many different things. I can give you to my mind, a very funny example. Just last week, we had a lecture about history of New York Mafia. And I talked about The Godfather and about The Sopranos. And Sopranos were shown, I think, 25 years ago for the first time. And many people now are, not offended, but sorry and unhappy. They say that I made spoilers about that. Why did I do that? I'm really sorry. I didn't want to offend anybody. If somebody who is listening me now feels the same, I feel really sorry. It simply didn't come to my mind that you can spoil The Sopranos. Like, can you spoil The Godfather? And if I talk about more sensitive problems, then, something I learned already, I have to be very, very careful, because some words that sounds completely neutral to me, people can be offended in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Baltic states. And people sometimes, as soon as they hear something that doesn't connect with their ideas, they start already making political conclusions, which, not all of them, of course, because I have many comments like, maybe I do not agree, but still it was really interesting to listen to you, or something like that. But this sensitivity and this feeling of people are constantly politically alert. That's the situation now. And I'm trying to deal with it gently, because I think one of the most important things now for us to be gentle to each other, as far as we can. It's not always possible, unfortunately.
I'll tell you, ironically, I'm reading a book right now. It's called Tough Jews, about the same gangster era in New York, except Jewish gangsters.
Taxi Siegel and Meir Lansky. And
exactly. And so what this author talks about, I don't know if there's a way to prove this, but maybe this is his opinion on it. He said that coming out of World War II, when Jews felt so weak and powerless and completely abused by society and just mass murdered, this generation, the subsequent generation, a lot of the men felt that they needed to be strong and to arm themselves and to ensure that nobody ever messes with the Jews, that Jews are viewed as a tough people. And that's where we see that wave of men who are aggressive, who do gang activity, who want to take power back, who arm themselves. And I never thought about it that way. And I thought that was a good point.
It's also a result of the war. Actually, I'm sure that Jewish people can have a lot of different symbols and icons besides gangsters. But I understand this idea, yeah.
I do have a question about something you said earlier. So you said that maybe your Jewish upbringing wasn't particularly strong, although you identify with, the culture and you understand how it played a role into who you are. But why do you think it wasn't so strong?
Oh, well, because I grew in Soviet times, and my grandfather, who was the main Jew in our family, let's say like that, who read Yiddish and Hebrew and who talked a lot with me about history of Jewish people. And he wrote a book about Jewish identity in Soviet times. But he was from this generation that was strongly anti-religious. And for him, Jewish tradition was not connected with religion, with literature, with history, with language, maybe, not with religion. And my father didn't understand himself as a Jew. He sympathized and so on, but he was a person of Russian culture, and that was more important to him. And so that's how it went, that Jewish inheritance was important. It was something we talk about, we discussed, I don't know. Well, we had matzot every year, but we didn't celebrate the Pesach. I think it's rather typical not because of nobody tried to hide the Jewishness, but it didn't seem important.
Have you been to Israel?
Yes, of course, and I'm an Israeli citizen.
What did you think?
Oh, well, a lot of things, and there are many things that I really like there. And I suppose that thing that has always amazed me most of all is their social programs and how every person matters. It's clear now in today's situation also, with hostages and so on. But not only, it was clear always, because I look at my aunt who is alone after oncological operation and a broken hip in Beersheba, and how much care she gets. It's fantastic. What makes me a little bit cautious is just this toughness, maybe something you talked about. And I understand why it is there. It's clear, but still it's hard to live like that.
And when we think about Ukraine and Russia, and you talk about what society will look like after the war, I think Israel is a great example of looking at people who live under constant war and how that has impacted their mentality and the society that they live in.
But at the same time, Israel is the great example, like ambulance working in Shabbat, because human life is more important than Torah. I think this lesson should be learned by everybody. And when you can free southern terrorists to get one Israeli soldier back, it's fantastic.
And the other thought I had when you were speaking is, I think when you talk about your upbringing and how it's not that anyone was hiding it, just it wasn't important or significant at the time of your upbringing. I think that's very common for people that grew up in the former Soviet Union, even what I see with my parents and my grandparents. But the funny thing is, how I grew up, Donetsk has a lot of Jewish people. It wasn't a place, it's not like Western Ukraine, you know what I mean? Like, it's very common to meet Jewish people in Donetsk. Even how we speak, it's influenced by a Yiddish and Jewish language. Donetsk has a lot of words that are not used in other Ukrainian or Russian words. For example, trempel, which is veshalka, it's a Donetsk word.
Uh-huh.
or tarmazok, which is like a lunchbox, but that's not used in the Russian or Ukrainian language. I'm pretty sure what I speak is technically considered surzik because it is a dialect of like a Russian Ukrainian mix. But what I was always told by my family is that, you're Jewish, you're different from these people, you belong to a different group of people. Even though my family is not religious, we also don't do Passover. Yes, we'll eat matzah and then we'll go eat bread kind of thing. But what was most interesting to me is when I went back to Ukraine and Russia for the first time after we immigrated. I've only been to Russia once in my life. I was 23 the first time. So, I wasn't a kid. I remember it very well. My family looks very different in terms of our features from what Russian Orthodox or Ukrainian Orthodox person looks like. It's almost easy for me to tell who is Russian-speaking Jewish versus who is not Russian-speaking Jewish because we have different features. We have bigger eyes. We have darker features. We have different proportions of the face, different even body shapes sometimes. And I had never thought about it that way because in America, I'm always viewed as Ukrainian first. You know what I mean? Whereas in Ukraine, I'm viewed as Jewish first. So I'm not the same anywhere I go.
That just shows how relative all these things are and
Absolutely.
how, in reality, how all people are maybe not alike, but close to each other.
Yeah, so I think about that a lot. And, you said you're starting your tour, so you'll get to meet some of the Russian-speaking people in North America. Coming as an immigrant to America, as a Russian-speaking Jew, you're like second-class citizen to the American Jews. So if you go to the synagogue or you go somewhere else, the Russian-speaking Jews always keep to themselves because they're never quite in the American Jewish society. And I know your audience is not just Jewish. Like you have lots of people who are not Jewish. Probably the majority of your listenership in North America is non-Jewish. But it's always an interesting phenomenon that I saw. The Russian Jews, that we never quite assimilated into American society.
I don't know, maybe that's not because of Russian Jews, but just unfortunately, I think that every immigrant generation, the older generation always looks with contempt to new ones who arrive. That's bad, but that's it.
Okay, well, I got a few more questions for you to pick your brain on some topics. The first one is, what's keeping you up at night and why?
Well, I'm worried about Russia. I'm worried about people I love that are still in Russia, and I'm really worried about possibility of nuclear war.
You had been speaking out about the war, even when it had started in 2013 and 2014, but you made the choice to leave, I think, in 2022 permanently, right? You said, I'm getting out of here. What do you think that experience was like for you? It's not easy, but I can hear the way that you're saying it. You were like, I felt like I had no choice. I knew this was the right decision for me, and my family decided we had to leave. But in the moment when you were thinking about the pros and cons, what do you think you felt? Were you scared? What came into your thinking?
Well, can't say that I was ready, but that was something I was waiting. I didn't think that invasion will start. Now, many people say that they knew. I didn't know. I didn't believe it. But I felt that things are getting tougher and tougher, harder and harder. I understood that soon I will be made a foreign agent because of things I do, I write, and I say. And even at that time, it was clear that the person who is called foreign agent cannot stay in Russia. It's a life of an outcast. Some people still do, and they are real heroes, and it's a very tough life. So my idea was that if they do it, I leave the country immediately. But that happened already after the war. I was made foreign agent in September 22. But in February, I was so sure that nothing terrible can happen that I was on holiday. On the 24th of February, I was on holiday in Greece. So now I think that maybe it was an advantage because I didn't have to make my suits, to say goodbye to everybody, to decide what I leave and what I take with me, because I just had one suitcase that I took for my 1 week holiday. And I just went to Portugal where my daughter lives. And, first weeks, maybe even months, of course, I was in shock, as everybody. I felt very bad. I had constant stomach aches for psychological reasons. And I had a terrible allergy suddenly in February and so on. But I was kind of, you can't say excited, but I was always on alert. And there was a feeling that it will end soon in some way. It will not last long. So now I think it wasn't as hard as it became later. Because at that moment, I had to make a lot of everyday life decisions, like moving, finding an apartment, buying new things, making something with my papers, and so on. You always had to think about some details. And then when you already have kind of stable life, then you feel, and where is my old life? What happened to it? And at that moment, it's really hard. Sometimes I feel like, a heavy, heavy burden that presses on me.
I have a lot of friends from Russia that made Aliyah to Israel when the war started because they wanted to leave. And the hardest part is hearing them say, I used to be somebody. I used to have a career. I used to have accomplishments. I achieved something in my life. And I'm here and nobody likes me. I'm treated as, a second-class citizen here. I can't speak to anyone. My vocabulary level is of a 7-year-old. Do you know how belittling that is?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, that's the hardest part. But on a lighter note, I want to ask you the inverse of that question that I just asked you. What are you optimistic about and why?
I can't say that I'm really optimistic. Everybody thinks I'm optimistic. No, I don't think that things will change for good tomorrow. I will be happy if they do, but possibility is really small. But that's what I already told you. I believe in human beings, in people's decency, in people's love. And I know so many good people. And even during last 2 years in my new life, I met so many good people, so many interesting people, so much love, so much care. That's what I believe in. I see incredible examples of solidarity, both here and in Russia.
And last question for you. How can people connect with you and find more about your work?
Well, we have a site, Tamara Eidelman, and there is information about, there's my YouTube channel, and you can find a lot of things I think and say there. And you have my social nets and information about all my travels, because we also have a project, Travels with Tamara Eidelman, is also on the website. And there are all contacts there. Or if you want to contact me personally, please come to my lecture.
Perfect. And all of that information I have in the description of the episode. Tamara, thank you so much for doing this. It's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Hope to see you in America.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People Do You Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People Do You Want to Know.